The rain fell in sheets that afternoon, drumming on the roof of Evelyn Carter's little house at the edge of town. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of unpaid bills that had become permanent residence there. The silence was heavy, too heavy. She pressed a hand against her coffee mug. Though the coffee had gone cold hours ago, nights were the worst, but afternoons like this, gray and endless, came close. Almost a year since her husband had died, and still she caught herself waiting for the sound of his boots on the porch, for his voice calling, "I'm home." But the house had been quiet for a long time. A sudden knock startled her, sharp 3 quick raps against the door. Just a quick note: if you're new here and haven't subscribed, please take a moment to do so. Your support means the world and helps us share more heartfelt stories. Her heart jumped, racing in the way it sometimes did when the unexpected broke her routine. She stood slowly, pulling her cardigan tighter around her. When she opened the door, a delivery man stood dripping wet, a cardboard package in his hands. "Evelyn Carter?" he asked, glancing at his clipboard. "Yes," she said cautiously. He shoved the box toward her. "Sign here." Before she could even protest, before she could explain, he was already halfway back to the truck. The rain swallowed him, the red taillights vanishing into the storm. Evelyn looked down at the box. The name on the label wasn't hers. The address wasn't hers either. It belonged to a man who used to live 2 streets over, a neighbor she'd seen once or twice before the house went empty. She should have set it aside. She knew that. Leave it for the courier to correct tomorrow. But loneliness has a way of tugging at you, making you notice things you normally wouldn't. The package was heavier than it looked. She carried it into the kitchen, setting it on the table between the bills and the untouched mug of coffee. For a long time, she just stared at it. The rain tapped against the window. The clock ticked steadily. The box waited. Her fingers brushed the tape. She froze. What was she doing? This wasn't hers. But another part of her whispered, "Open it." The sound of tearing tape echoed too loudly in the quiet house. Inside was another box, wood and hand-carved, the kind you'd find in an antique shop, worn smooth with years of handling. Evelyn's breath caught. She opened the lid. On top lay a photograph. A man with gentle eyes. A little girl curled on his lap, clutching his shirt like he was her anchor in the world. Both smiling, both frozen in a moment of happiness that felt so far away now. Her throat tightened. She turned it over. On the back, in neat handwriting, "For Sophie." From Mima. Evelyn's knees went weak. She lowered herself into the chair, clutching the photo. She reached back into the box. Letters, dozens of them, tied neatly with twine. The envelopes were soft at the edges, as if they'd been touched over and over again. Her hands shook as she opened one. The letter was written in a woman's careful script. Words of love, words of goodbye. A mother writing to her daughter, leaving pieces of herself behind for when she could no longer be there. Evelyn's chest ached. She pressed the paper to her heart, her tears falling onto the ink. This wasn't her story. This wasn't her family. But somehow, it felt like the grief was speaking to her anyway. She knew she had no right to read another letter, no right to keep this box. And yet, something inside whispered that her part in this was just beginning. She didn't know who Sophie was, or where she lived. But Evelyn knew one thing with absolute certainty. This package wasn't done with her yet, because sometimes wrong things find the right people, and sometimes they change everything. The next morning, Evelyn couldn't shake the weight of the wooden box. It sat on her table, silent, like it had been waiting years for someone to finally open it. Every time she walked past, she felt it watching her. She'd try to focus on her routine, watering the wilting plants on the windowsill, sorting laundry, reheating yesterday's soup. But no matter what she did, her eyes kept straying back to the photo of the man and the little girl. "For Sophie," from Mama. The handwriting echoed in her mind. Finally, she slid the photo into her coat pocket, lifted the box into her arms, and stepped out into the chill air. The storm had passed, but the streets still gleamed with puddles. She followed the address on the faded delivery label, 2 streets over, just like she remembered. The house looked tired, paint peeling, a mailbox leaning crooked, curtains drawn tight, like they were guarding secrets inside. Evelyn stood at the gate for a long moment, clutching the box. Her pulse quickened. She almost turned back, but then the door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, mid-30s, maybe a bit older, his face worn, like life had pressed too hard on him. He had the same eyes as the man in the photograph, but dimmer now, tired. He noticed her, straightening. "Can I help you?" His voice was wary, guarded. Evelyn hesitated, then lifted the box slightly. "This was delivered to me, by mistake. I think it belongs here." His eyes dropped to the box, and something in his expression cracked just for a second before he smoothed it over. "I see." He cleared his throat. "Thank you. You didn't have to. I'll take it." But when he reached for the box, Evelyn didn't let go. "There's a little girl in the photo." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "Is she yours?" His jaw tightened. He nodded once. "My daughter Sophie." The name landed heavy between them. Before Evelyn could say anything else, a sound carried from inside the house. Small footsteps, dragging across wooden floors. The door creaked open wider, and a girl appeared in the shadowed hallway. 7, maybe 8 years old. Pale, her hair tangled. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit against her chest, her eyes large, watchful, flicked to Evelyn, and then down to the box. For a moment, the girl didn't move. Then, with a suddenness that startled Evelyn, she darted forward, wrapping her arms around the box like it was treasure she'd been waiting for. Mine, the girl whispered. Her voice was hoarse, as if unused. The father stepped down quickly, prying her arms away. Sophie, he said firmly. Inside, the girl's lip trembled, but she obeyed, backing into the shadows without another word. The door shut behind her. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart pounding. That one word, mine, still rang in her ears. The man adjusted his stance, shifting the box under his arm. His voice was stiff now, defensive. Thank you again, but you shouldn't have opened it. Heat rose in Evelyn's cheeks. She wanted to explain, to tell him she hadn't meant to intrude, that the letters had reached inside her own hollow grief and shaken something awake. But his expression made it clear. This was not a man who let strangers in. She nodded, stepping back toward the gate. I'm sorry, truly. He gave no reply, just turned and carried the box inside. The door closed. The lock clicked. Evelyn stood in the quiet street, staring at the house long after she should have walked away. The image of Sophie's wide, silent eyes wouldn't leave her, neither would the sound of that single word. And Evelyn knew, deep down, this wasn't the end. The package had found her for a reason, and whether the father liked it or not, she and that little girl were bound now, in a way none of them could yet understand. Evelyn tried to forget. She really did. She told herself she'd done her part, returned the package, apologized, walked away. The rest wasn't her business. But at night, lying in bed, she saw the little girl's eyes, wide, hollow, desperate, and she kept hearing that word, mine. By the third morning, Evelyn gave up pretending. She set out a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and unfolded the one letter she hadn't returned, the first one. She'd read before guilt had stopped her. The handwriting was delicate, slanted. Every line carried a weight Evelyn could feel in her chest. My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, it means I can't be with you anymore. But I want you to know, every day I spent with you was my treasure. When the world feels heavy, when Daddy seems tired, remember this. You are light. You are joy. You are the reason I kept going. Evelyn wiped her cheeks before she realized she was crying. She folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and tucked it back into its envelope. She shouldn't keep it. She knew that, but something about those words felt like they had reached across time to hold her hand. Later that week, fate or maybe something stronger intervened. She was carrying groceries home when she saw Sophie again. The little girl sat on the curb outside the same tired house, hugging her stuffed rabbit. Her knees were scraped, her eyes distant. Evelyn hesitated. She should keep walking, but her feet moved toward the girl anyway. Hello, Sophie, she said softly. The girl blinked up at her. No answer, just a quiet stare. Evelyn crouched down, her shopping bag rustling. That's a brave rabbit you've got there. For the faintest second, Sophie's lips twitched. Not a smile, not exactly, but something close. Then the front door opened. The father stepped out, eyes narrowing. What are you doing here? His voice was sharp, protective. Evelyn straightened quickly. I was just saying hello. His jaw clenched. She doesn't need strangers meddling in her life. Evelyn's throat tightened, but she held his gaze. She doesn't need strangers. She needs people, people who see her. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. The man's face shifted, something flickered, like a battle he was fighting inside himself. Then he shook his head. You don't understand. He scooped Sophie into his arms. She clung to his shirt, rabbit dangling, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's as he carried her inside. The door slammed. Evelyn stood frozen on the street, the ache in her chest sharp and insistent. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter again, tracing the words with her finger. The mother's voice felt alive in the room. And then the thought came sudden, reckless. What if Sophie never read these? What if the letters stayed locked in a box, their words fading, their love buried? Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth. She shouldn't even have one of the letters. She had no right on it. And yet, the next morning, she wrote a note, short, careful. Your daughter deserves to know her mother's words. If you don't let her read them, you'll lose her twice. She slipped it, along with the letter, into an envelope and slid it through the slot of the father's door. Her hands trembled the whole time. Hours passed. Evening fell. No response. She was washing dishes when the knock came. Firm, reluctant when she opened the door. He stood there, the father, shadows under his eyes, the envelope in his hand. His voice was low. You read them. Evelyn swallowed. Only one, but she should read them too. She should feel her mother's love. He looked at her for a long time, jaw tight, shoulders tense. Then, quietly, he said, You don't know what it's like to lose everything. Evelyn's voice broke before she could stop it. Yes, I do. Something shifted in his expression. His eyes softened, just a fraction. Behind him, in the dim hallway, Sophie's small figure appeared again, silent, watching. Evelyn's heart ached as she met the girl's gaze. The package had carried more than letters. It carried unfinished love. and she wasn't sure this family could bear the weight alone. The days after their confrontation stretched long and uncertain. Evelyn expected silence, a slammed door, distance, maybe even anger, but instead, something unexpected happened. Late one morning, she heard footsteps outside her gate. When she opened the door, Sophie stood there, alone. Her stuffed rabbit dangled from one arm, its ear dragging in the dirt. Evelyn knelt to meet her eyes. "Hello again," she whispered. Sophie didn't speak. She just held out a folded piece of paper. Evelyn's hands trembled as she took it. The handwriting wasn't a child's, it was her father's, scrawled and uneven. "If you're so sure you can help, then prove it. Sophie doesn't talk. She hasn't since her mother died. If you think those letters can change something, be my guest. But don't expect miracles." Evelyn pressed the paper to her chest. She looked at Sophie, who stared back with that same hollow quiet, and she made a decision. "Would you like to come in?" Evelyn asked gently. For a moment, Sophie didn't move. Then, slowly, she nodded. Inside the small kitchen, Evelyn set a plate of biscuits on the table. Sophie climbed into a chair, rabbit still clutched tightly. Evelyn sat across from her, unsure where to begin. She slid an envelope across the table. "This," she said softly, "is from your mama." Sophie's small hands trembled as she opened it. She pulled out the letter, eyes scanning the page. Her lips moved, not with words but with effort, as if she wanted to form them. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she watched. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full, alive with meaning. When Sophie finished, she hugged the letter to her chest and looked at Evelyn. "Really looked more," she whispered. The word was faint, fragile, but it was there. Evelyn's throat tightened. She reached across the table, squeezing Sophie's hand. "Yes, sweetheart. There are more." That evening there was another knock on Evelyn's door. The father stood there again, arms crossed, expression torn between gratitude and defensiveness. "She spoke," Evelyn said before he could speak. Her voice shook. "She asked for more." His face softened just slightly before the walls came back up. "She hasn't said a word in months," he muttered. "Not to me. Not to anyone." He rubbed his jaw, looking away. "I don't know if I can do this." Evelyn took a careful step closer. "You don't have to do it alone." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the trees. Finally, he nodded once, reluctant. "Vulnerable tomorrow," he said. "You can come by. Just don't give her false hope." The next day Evelyn carried the box of letters back to the tired old house. Inside, the air was heavy, the curtains drawn, the silence sharp. But Sophie was waiting. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor, rabbit by her side. Her eyes bright with something Evelyn hadn't seen before, anticipation. Evelyn chose a letter at random, her voice steady as she read aloud. The words filled the room, warm and aching all at once. A mother's voice carried across the void. Sophie leaned closer, her fingers twisting in the rabbit's fur. Her eyes glistened. When Evelyn finished, Sophie whispered again. The father stood in the doorway, arms folded, but his eyes betrayed him. They shimmered. He turned away quickly, but not before Evelyn noticed. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn visited often. Sometimes she read, sometimes Sophie did. Each letter unlocked a little more of the girl's silence, coaxing words from her like fragile blossoms after a long winter. Evelyn watched the father too. How his shoulders slowly loosened, how the bitterness in his tone gave way to weariness, and then to something softer. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep with a letter clutched in her hands, Evelyn found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring into the dark. "She was everything," he said quietly, not looking at her. "My wife, she held us together. When she was gone, it all fell apart." Evelyn's voice was steady, though her own grief stirred. "And yet she's still here, through these letters, through Sophie, through you." He looked at her then, his eyes searching, as if he wanted to believe but didn't know how. The air between them was heavy with unspoken things before Evelyn could say more. Sophie's small voice floated from the hallway. "Daddy." The father blinked, straightening. "Yes, sweetheart." Sophie pattered into the room, rubbing her eyes. She held a letter against her chest. "She said you'll like too," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mama said that." The father froze, his eyes brimmed. He pulled Sophie into his arms, clutching her as if she were all that held him upright. Evelyn turned away, tears stinging her own eyes. The walls were breaking, slowly, painfully, but breaking all the same. And Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. Winter crept in slowly, frosting the windows and biting at the edges of Evelyn's little house. But inside, warmth had returned in ways she hadn't felt since before her husband died. She came often now, carrying soup or biscuits, sometimes just herself. The house that once felt shuttered and cold seemed to breathe again. Sophie's laughter, faint and tentative, began to echo in the hallways. Her voice, once silent, grew stronger with every letter they read. One afternoon, Evelyn found Sophie sprawled on the living room rug, rabbit tucked under her arm, a pile of envelopes spread around her like scattered petals. She said, "I'm brave," Sophie whispered, showing Evelyn a letter with pride. "Mama said so." Evelyn brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face, her heart swelling. She was right. The father, Daniel, she'd learned to call him, stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching them. His eyes were softer now, no longer guarded steel, but fragile glass. Later that night, as Evelyn gathered her coat, he walked her to the door. His voice was low. "You've given her something I couldn't. You've given her back her mother." Evelyn shook her head gently. "No, her mother never left. She's just been waiting to be heard." For a moment, the quiet stretched between them. Something unspoken shimmered there. Not romance. Not yet. But recognition. Two people who had been broken in different ways, now standing in the same light. But healing is never smooth. It comes with edges. A week later, Evelyn arrived to find the house dark, curtains drawn tight again. Sophie didn't run to greet her. The air was heavy, tense. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the box of letters shoved aside. A bottle half empty stood in front of him. His eyes were red. "What happened?" Evelyn whispered. He rubbed his face with both hands. "She asked me why I never read the letters with her, why I kept them locked away, and I hissed, voice cracked. I told her I couldn't. I told her I wasn't strong enough, and now she won't look at me." Evelyn's heart clenched. She wanted to reach across the table, but she didn't. "Not yet. She doesn't need you to be strong," she said softly. "She just needs you to be there, even broken, especially broken." His hands trembled. "What if I fail her again?" Evelyn's voice was steady, though her throat burned. "Then fail together. But don't disappear. Don't let her lose you too." That night, Evelyn stayed. She cooked, she sat, she read. Sophie clung to her, but her eyes kept darting to her father, waiting, testing, hoping. Finally, when Evelyn's voice grew tired, she closed the letter and set it aside. "Daniel," she said quietly, "why don't you read this one?" He froze, his hands tightened into fists. "I can't." "You can," Evelyn whispered. "Not for yourself. For her." Sophie's small voice broke the silence. "Please, Daddy." Daniel's chest rose and fell. His hands shook as he took the letter. His eyes blurred as he read the first words, but slowly, painfully, he kept going. His voice cracked halfway through, and tears spilled freely down his face. But Sophie reached for him, curling into his side, listening with every ounce of her small being. When he finished, the silence in the room was no longer empty. It was sacred. Sophie whispered, "You sound like Mama." Daniel pulled her close, pressing his face to her hair. And for the first time since his wife's death, he let himself weep openly, not hidden, not in shadows, but here, in front of his daughter. Evelyn turned away, tears burning her own eyes. This was their moment, not hers, but in her chest, something mended too. Over the weeks that followed, Daniel read more letters, sometimes stumbling, sometimes breaking down, but always with Sophie beside him, and Evelyn, steady, quiet, became part of the rhythm. She taught Sophie to bake cookies, filling the house with the smell of sugar and warmth. She showed Daniel how to let silence feel safe again, instead of suffocating. And little by little, the house that once felt like a tomb began to feel like a home. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Daniel and Evelyn sat on the porch. The night was cold, but the stars burned bright. "She talks about you," Daniel said quietly, "when you're not here. She says you make her feel safe, like her mama's letters do." Evelyn's breath caught. "I don't know if I can ever be what she lost." "You don't have to be," he said. "You already are. Something else." For a long moment, their eyes held, not as broken strangers anymore, but as people slowly daring to believe in something new. Evelyn's chest ached, but it wasn't the sharp ache of grief anymore. It was something gentler, something alive. That night, Evelyn lay in her bed and realized the truth. The package hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been delivered to the wrong person. It had been delivered to exactly the right one, because sometimes life knows what we need before we do, and sometimes the wrong package carries the right beginning.